So recently I found some friction when working with listing of files and dumping out files at the command line. I'm the type of person that likes to take the time to take a look inside of directories. A lot of times I'll poke around to find what it is I want here, maybe use some tab completion and then look at the directories in here. And okay, there you go. There's a C directory. I think that's what I'm looking for. Hit tab again in here. And maybe I want to look at the contents of this file. This is what I'm looking for. Of course, if I just tab complete that with ls on the front, well, then when I run that, of course, I'm not going to get anything out. I'm not going to be able to see the file. And so if I want to take a look at it, got to hit the up arrow. And then I got to change this from ls to a cat. Then I can run that and I can dump out the file. And so I feel like that's a lot of friction there when I want to work with files. I wish I just had one command. And if I pass a directory to it, I want it to list the files. If I pass a file to it, I want it to dump out the contents of the file. So you could imagine, what if I just had a combined command that did both? And so I set something up for that today. I don't know if I'm going to like this in the long term, but I want to try it out. That's my approach to dot files. If I think there's a function or an alias that would help out, I just go ahead and create it. And then I see how much do I use this? Is it something I want? And then eventually in the future, if it's not something I'm using, I'll probably come and clean it up, or it'll just become a vestigial part of my dot files. Nonetheless, it's a trial and error process to see what exactly I want to have available when I'm working at the command line. And so what I set up here, first off, I have a new function called lscat. When I pass a directory like the Z shell directory to it, of course, I can just tab complete like normal. When I find something that I want, if I land on a file, actually, let me back up here. If I land on a directory, there you go, I get the contents of it. And then if I pick a file, don't have to change anything. It's just going to dump out the contents of the file. And then to help me out, to make sure I don't forget about this new function, I actually set up abbreviations in fish shell. So if I type in ls and hit space here, it expands into lscat. Or if I try to use la, which is an alias I like to use, that expands into lscat as well. Or if I try to use the cat command, that's going to expand as well. That way, all of the commands that I might use to take a look at a file or a directory, they all map into my new function without actually replacing it. That way, if I need some code to actually use the ls command, it's still there. I'm not masking it. Instead, I'm just redirecting myself when I type in a command, because in fish shell, abbreviations are only expanded when you're working with an interactive shell and you're actually typing something in. And if you're curious about the implementation, this is sitting out in my .files repo out on GitHub. You can grab a copy of it. Here is the implementation for this. So this is fish shell, so keep that in mind. I'm defining 3 abbreviations, just like I said, that will expand the 3 different commands into my new function. So this is an lscat function that I have defined down below here. And this is a bit more complicated than it needs to be. Basically, I accept a series of paths. Actually, if I don't pass in a path here, just like the ls command, if I don't pass in a path, I'm going to list out the files. And then I take all of the paths that are passed. You can actually pass multiple. And for each of them, I'm going to either dump out the contents of a file using this lscat function. That's up above. I'll show you that in a moment. Or I'm going to dump out the contents of the directory. Again, that's above, and I'll show you that in a moment. Basically, this is calling cat here, and then this one's calling ls. And then if something goes wrong and I pass a path that's not valid, like I do an ls here and foo, that doesn't exist, I'm going to see the same thing as if I had typed in the command here for ls and had typed in foo. You can see I get a very similar message in that case. And then if for some reason something doesn't match those first 3 conditions, I'm going to print out that I need to handle that. Can't think of anything, at least not anything substantial that I'd come across, but hey, you never know, and so I'll get a nice little warning in that case. All right, so these 2 functions here, like I said, catting out the file. The only reason I split this out as a function is because I want to be able to use one of 2 commands. There's the cat command, which is available just about everywhere. And then I like the bat command, which gives me the syntax highlighting. If you've never seen this before here, first I'll run the cat command here. And so if I dump out this Z shell file, lots of code inside of here. Obviously, it's not very easy to read the various parts because there's no highlighting. If, however, I modify that on the front here, if I change this to the bat command, if I run that now, much easier to see what's going on inside of this file. So that's why I have that little nested function, just to sweep that under the rug. And then same thing, if it's a directory, normally I would just use ls-al, but on some systems I've installed another tool that's like ls, like exa or eza or lsd. And so if one of those is present, I'll prefer it over ls just because I think the coloring is better. For example here, if I use the ls command on this directory, actually if I use ls-al, I think that'll be a bit more reasonable. No coloring in that case, but I get a list view. If, however, I use exa, again, the same arguments in the current directory, I get some nice coloring of the columns. It's easier to parse out the different parts of it, like the permissions or the owner or the date. And so that's why I'll prefer those over just the straight up ls command. So that's why I have this rug here, if you will. All of this basically just calls ls. And so that's it. That's all it takes to implement this function. I'll see what I think of it. If I make any material changes to this, I'll try to make a new video, cover those features. For now, though, let me know, what do you think of this? Is this something you think would be useful? Or do you think I'm doing it wrong? Is there a different way I should be approaching using commands at the command line to list files, to open up files and look at them? Or have you found some other tool that basically does the same thing that you like? Let me know in the comments down below.